Welcome to another episode of Feed the Trolls. I got a little bit of a speech that I want to do before we start. So when I first started working, when I had to get a real job, I had a boss who told me many years ago that I was chicken little because I always look at the negative and I always think the sky is falling. And I got really annoyed and I said, no, I tend to look at both sides. I just don't think everything is rainbows and roses. And I do think sometimes you have to look at something with a bit of a critical mindset. That was my thinking. And
that must be why you paired up with me then, because logically I'm like a ray of sunshine, Like the thing is, I always try to look glass half full. That's kind of my philosophy, So
yeah, exactly. So you're really positive and you help uplift me all the time to always look at the good. But what happened last year was obviously we heard about this new open system that was going to happen. We're doing away with the partner networks. And I remember speaking to so many talents and player managers and people all telling me what a great idea this was. And
it was very positively received, right? Everyone was kind of loving the idea, yeah.
Everyone thought it was the best thing ever. And at the time, in all the conversations I had, I kept going, I don't think so. Like, there's something about this that isn't working. Like, there was an issue about invites. I felt like what was going to happen if it was based on rankings is the top teams would just be able to point farm. Teams in tier 2 or smaller regions wouldn't be able to get points.
Okay.
There was lots of conversations from talent saying there were going to be so many job opportunities. I was like, no ways. If I was a TO, I would only hire the best of the best, keep it very locked down, guarantees, all of that. And every time I worded it, no one ever said to my face, you're being negative, but I could see they were all like, oh, that's a negative way to look at it. So, lol, joke's on you, because today we're going to prove that actually it's not all rainbow and sunshine.
Okay.
That's where we're at. And we're joined by Threat now, the general manager of NIP. But I mean, Threat, let's walk through what it is that your job actually entails for someone that doesn't know what a GM does.
Yeah, so I think it actually is very different depending on which organization and team you're in. But the job I have at NIP right now is that I am the boss of all of our Counter-Strike teams. We have the main team, we have Young Ninjas, and obviously our impact team. I also have a Nipsvea, which is like a Swedish talent project that I'm running. So you can basically see it as I'm the boss of all the coaches. The coaches, they have the final say in all of their respective teams, but I oversee everything. I watch a lot of, their practices, everything around it. And also, I have to make sure we will actually play tournaments. And that's why we're going to talk about the VRS ranking today.
By the way, just as an aside, that's one of the reasons actually why Thorin's less negative about NIP, because basically I heard internally actually Threat and Exist do get a lot of say over what the Counter-Strike team is and who joins and all that stuff, which is, but this way, I'd just say that's just what we wanted in the past, that's all. And now that's it, so it's all good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's very, very key for me that the coaches will have the final say in who join. Because I usually make the joke, people have these, NIP made all these changes throughout all of these years. And actually, the last player change that I had the final word in was Freiburg to Res, funnily enough. Right?
That was like 8 years ago, so at this point in time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, obviously, I talk to players and help, and I agree with some of these changes. But having the final word, that was the last one.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to focus in now. Here's the thing. I know for a lot of you watching, you do not care about Tier 2. I've seen this a million times. I work Tier 2 events. You don't watch them. You don't know the teams. You only watch the big stuff, which means you've probably only watched a lot of the partner league stuff. You have no idea how this is affecting the events that you're watching or the teams that you're seeing. So we're going to dumb it down in the beginning so that you're on the same page as us. Thorin, explain the Valve ranking system. How does it work, the textbook definition, before we look at how it's not working?
I don't even pretend to know that, by the way. I just have my experts that tell me the stuff. No, basically, as far as I know, what happens is tournaments have to apply for a points ranking and get the status, essentially. I don't even know what you'd compare this to. Maybe in tennis, where people get ATP ranking and stuff. But the problem is I don't know how that works. I do know there are unranked events in sports like tennis and dart and snooker and things like that. So as far as I know, it's based on things like prize money, something to do with maybe how many teams you have and stuff like that. But the issue, if you notice so far, and this is actually something, by the way, which we won't get into, but I'll just plant the seed. I'm sure in the future when people have discussions actually about some of the female teams qualifying, one of the aspects will be what happens when you get to a certain ranking, which is basically the bottom of the ranking that the big events hire from. As far as I can tell, a lot of the events that have the big points are just the lands. And so essentially the big lands, the issue right now is the big lands that everyone would go to. It's not like the old circuit where you have a million lands and they all have them. It's just mainly the big ones have all the points. And then the online cups have them sometimes, but that's going to be an issue we're going to get into ourselves, because that's actually probably the first battleground where it seems like all the points and status is getting added and taken away and added and taken away, or it comes in and then no one knows, like, should it be there? And then there's all these extra things going on. So in theory, the idea is a good one. The idea is like, essentially what they're trying to do is what we all did as experts in the game anyway. Like, I'll give you a quick obvious example. HLTV eventually did this with their formula, but I used to do a rolled ranking before HLTV did one. And all I would do essentially is, I wasn't really deciding, I think this team's better. I was doing stuff like looking, right, oh, they came like top 4 DreamHack Summer, but then they did have like top 8 at the major. So it's like the major is bigger than DreamHack Summer, but who did they beat? And is like top 4 better for that? And what I was trying to evaluate basically is, what should the value of a placing at an event be worth? So I would do it based on things like, how big an event is it? Is there big prize money? Do the top teams all attend? Did some of them skip? So that's like the back end version of what they're doing. They're doing the one before that, which is we're trying to use the information from past tournaments to decide who to invite to this one. Whereas before we invited 1, big names, or 2, we just used the HLTV rating. We gave, like, famously, I thought ESL's worked when they did, like, it was like top 25 or something, got the kind of 8 invite. You at least got the playing invite. So essentially we were already trying to do something similar to this. I can see where Valve's idea came from, because I think what they're trying to do is do it like, right, we'll take care of that, though, so then nobody in the scene can be biased, or like, we don't know what your relationships are. If we can so we as Valve will create this system, and it'll do sort of almost like a computerized version of that. It'll just be a formula. You plug it in. Once you get the status, it's how many teams, so many points, and then from that, not only do you gain points, etc. By the way, the side detail is that's why almost all the big roster moves of the offseason, unless you were the best team in the world, was take an entire core, because you wanted the core with the points to get the invites to the next tournament. It's actually why, when we get into it, NIP actually gambled with their core. They didn't go that angle. They could probably have gotten a way worse team, by the way, on land, but just got like a team that was a few points higher in the ranking and got the points. But yeah, so essentially this actually, in a way, is going to affect everything in Counter-Strike, it looks like.
Yeah, and also, reason
why
I'm here is also,
a bit better.
Exactly. So, like a very TLDR way of describing this ranking is, it's a single centralized ranking that everyone has to follow. And you will have tier 1 events and tier 2 events. Tier 1 events has to invite from the number 1 spot and go down the ranking from there.
Yes.
And they have to do it, if the number 1 team declines, they have to go to the second team. And for tier 2 events, they start at rank 9. That is actually that. Then you sort of get the gist of the basics of this ranking, right? And there's no.
By the way,
exceptions.
don't get confused by the word invite. I think actually that was the word that confuses me, because when you say invite, it sounds like I'm saying, "Oh, I'll have a dinner party." Threat can come. Like, no, as he says, if you run a big event, by the way, you just have to invite 1 to 30 or whatever it is, and that's why, by the way, certain teams, if they're ranked 28, they just get invited. It's not about they like decide should they be invited. You just invite everyone. That's in theory, it makes it so the TO can't be biased as well. I can see what they were going for.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, still, I was on the team, Sam, where I was like, yeah, this is a good idea. And I would still say this is a good idea. The problem is Valve has this tendency that they sort of want to keep everything so in-house, and they don't ask for help from people who actually knows the business and the rankings and everything. And I mean, obviously, there are massive flaws with this. I'm sure it will be changed eventually, but I mean, looking at the patches for CS, probably will take a bit longer than it should.
Hopefully it doesn't take, 7 years or whatever it was for Vertical. I think it was 6, but okay, we'll hope a faster one than that.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we can just jump straight into, how the actual ranking works. Like, how do you actually get points?
You want to do that?
Yeah, exactly. So I apologize before that if I will be a bit technical here, but it's very, very hard not to be technical.
By the way, don't worry about it at home. If this sounds boring, it's going to get to all the really interesting stuff, because you're going to find out who might actually screw some of your favourite players and teams. So you'll enjoy that part. We'll get through this first part, so everyone's grounded, yeah?
Yeah, perfect. And I mean, also just to prove our point how Valve is so disconnected for everything, the main weight of reading this ranking is going to a GitHub repository.
Exactly.
Which is crazy. Which is that is if you're a developer, you're super at home with this, but most people are not developers. Yeah. They won't go to this, scroll through folders with, hundreds of ranking files, right? Because for the untrained eye, you go into one of these rankings, you see this is my favorite team. You scroll through all the matches and you see plus points, minus points. That is like the head-to-head adjustments. And it turns out that is actually completely pointless. It's usually 1% of the total ranking is from the head-to-head adjustments. Everything else comes from, the 4 big factors. There's 4 things that matters. Two of them is bounty offered, it's called. It's basically, I like to call it, how much cash you won. So you need to win a lot of money in tournaments, right? That is very, very important. All of this decays over time as well. So, and that's the thing I actually think is good. After 6 months, all of the points are completely gone. Let's take this Shanghai Major, for example, to put it into context. In May, that will be worth nothing. So it's very, very aggressive compared to old rankings, which I actually think is a good thing. That's one positive thing.
If you want turnover, yeah, in theory.
Yeah, exactly. And the other factor is you want to beat teams that has won a lot of money.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like bounty collected, it's called. And I'm going to jump to the ones that is the weirdest one to me.
By the way, notice how all of these, in theory, sound like they're actually awesome for little teams, because that sounds their threat. Like, oh, wait a minute, if I was Saw last year and I'd beaten like those big names, I'd have gotten all the points. But as he's saying, like, it's not that simple when you see how it plays out, though. But it all sounds great in theory so far. Keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually going to open ours because I have an example to how stupid this can become when it's only prize money. Because if the only measurement of important matches is the prize pool in that tournament, right? So we head into the RMR, which I would still consider quite an important tournament.
Very important, yeah.
Like, very, very important. I mean, we managed to go 3-2. Very unfortunate we play Spirit. Like, obviously we lost to the better teams, but I mean, we still got 3 wins. And because the tournament didn't have any prize money at all, so it then get multiplied by something called event weight. So if the tournament itself, the total amount of prize money is low, all the points will be low from that tournament. And the RMR doesn't have any prize money, or like a very, very little amount. So we lost 86% of the points just immediately gone, because the RMR
they lost from trying to qualify to the major and almost making it.
Yeah, exactly. We don't actually lose points, but the points we would have gained is multiplied by 0.14. So everything is gone. So it's so weird, and we actually benefited from this before. We played the Yalla Cup.
People don't know that's also how like Mongols, for example, got loads of like rankings in HLTV and stuff. Yeah, Mayala Compass was like the big thing, right?
Yeah, we come to
had loads of prize money. It was a lot.
Yeah, exactly. We come to the grand final, and then we won a lot of prize money. And for one final, we got immediately invited to the RMR because we just skipped the entire ranking to like top 14 in Europe, which is also didn't make any sense.
Yes.
We had very poor results after that.
Yeah,
it didn't matter because we won that once.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways, but it's obviously not, they don't really know what they're doing. They don't really understand CS. And this is, okay, I'm just going to keep going here.
Yeah, keep going.
So there's another factor called LAN wins, and this is the most funky one.
There you go, yes.
So LAN wins, it also sounds good, right? It's like,
again, by the way, we want LAN, not online cops and stuff. That was actually a problem in Tier 2. They were just playing online, right? So we want people to go to LAN threat and get an upset win over someone, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy part about this one is it completely disregards your opponents. It doesn't matter. So for every LAN win you get, this number just increases, and it increases your points like drastically.
By the way, spoiler, this is actually the reason. It's nothing to do with whether people want to invite women's team. That's actually how Imperial Female qualified. They went to a bunch of LANs, which are the Impact LANs, and won loads of matches. And the point is the system doesn't go where you're playing like Team Spirit in male CS, or were you playing someone's female team? They just counted wins. So, by the way, no one cheated that. That's the system that Valve designed, and it just happened that they meant that the team qualified. Yeah.
It's also important to remember it caps at 10 wins.
Right.
The points also lowers the further back in time you go. So if you have 10 recent LAN wins, you will have, that will be maxed out, and that will increase it by a lot. It's like literally you've been one of the top 10 most earning teams in prize money. It's as worth to have that. I came up with a crazy example for us. We played this tournament called Svenska Cupen, right? We didn't even manage to win it. We lost to Metis Esports in the final. But if that tournament, for some reason, had 5 more matches before we played the final, and we could have played any team. It doesn't matter if we play Navi or if we play.
Me and Sam came and had a mixed team.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we
and
make
3 Swedish splits, a Swedish Cup,
That still counts the same.
Right.
Yeah, and that is probably one of the biggest imbalances.
Yeah.
Because you have these teams now, they're trying to go through CCTs, including us, and then some country, they can also have like a regional Tier 2 event.
Yeah, of course.
They just go to a LAN. and then you get so much points. You will just jump over so many teams. You won't become top 10, of course, but as soon as you come to top 50, that is when you're starting to get these invites, right?
Yes.
So I wouldn't even be surprised if we're gonna see a lot of small land, magically appearing.
I actually heard some people
have some connection to orgs.
Here's the difference, Threat. I just get mad about this publicly because I want it to be all fixed. But I know some people already know this, and they're just trying to do like people do with the law. They're just going to abuse this loophole. They're looking for like regional circuits that they can attend and stack up the points, and then get to the space where you get their invite. Some people are definitely going to do this, yeah, for sure.
But I mean, so you can do that, Thread. Like, say, for example, if I'm a gambling company that sponsors a team and I would like that team to get invited to the major, I could technically do a regional LAN and throw a lot of prize money behind it if I wanted to and hope that my team does well. I mean, is that the situation we're sitting in where you can find those loopholes and abuse them?
Yeah, I mean, as long as in Valve's defense, there's not going to be much of it here, but you actually have to follow the invitation rules, right?
Yes.
But it's very iffy in the rules. I don't really get it, even though I've read it a couple of times. You can sort of have regional events, even more local, like Nordic and Sweden. And if you then have, a Swedish team and you have the invitation, it's not going to be as good as if you have, you have to go by the European ranking, because then you have to actually invite the top teams.
Doesn't it do something, Threat? Like, I actually think the other weird thing is, this was also one area people start to notice there was a negative last year. If you tried to do like a regional only type tournament, they actually almost make it the opposite, don't they? Where you're not allowed to invite like top teams or something, isn't it? Like, you have to invite teams outside of a certain ranking. So then it's like, I think they were trying to like create separation. Wasn't it something similar to that, where like it alters who you invite if it's a limited one?
Yeah, I think I think it's like if you I want to have a tier 2 event, not tier 1.
Yes,
then you're not allowed to invite teams ranked above 9th. So
see what I mean? So this is why it's really bizarre, because what's bizarre is, like, here's the weirdest part. This can get you, if you scam it like that on like the smaller events without the big teams, it can get you high in the VRS or high enough to be relevant to this discussion, whether you're actually a good team or not. But at the same time, you're not actually doing what people would want from the tier 2 event, which is you kind of what we used to have. You want the odd good team to go, and especially by the way, if it's regional, the example people gave was a great one. It's Brazil, isn't it? You would want, if you had a Brazilian regional tournament, they could have like a really good top 4. They have teams that go to the major. Well, essentially in this system, a bunch of them actually wouldn't be allowed to attend. So even the teams who are the lower teams can't then play like with the MIBR or something like that. If they're in the right position, they actually wouldn't be able to attend the event. So this is where, I mean, you can tell it was designed just theoretically and no one knew what it would play out like in reality, because I don't think the outcomes are what anyone wanted. I don't think Valve was choosing this and deciding this is what tier 2 means and tier 1 means. It just turns out that when it plays out, it's super funky, right?
Yeah, it is. It is very strange, and I always come back to the point where they should have, consulted with people in the community. I know they talk a lot with HLTV, which is good, and also, I mean, also a bit funky because they're also like the biggest news source out there.
True.
But it still feels like they're just some very senior developers, probably like very intelligent people sitting in a conference room in Seattle and making these calls. It's like, yeah, that sounds really good. They make some graph, and it's like, yeah, this seems to fit. But they don't actually work in the community. And it's so hard to read Valve as well, because they do this like they care, but it also sometimes feel like they're so disconnected. Like a very big problem that I know for a fact, because I talk with all the TOs, is if you're trying to reach out to them, like let's say I'm going to have a tier 2 tournament, and I'm reading the rules, and I don't get a thing, right? Okay, how do I actually do this? I email Valve and say, okay, I need help with this. How do I actually invite in this occasion? And then you just simply get no response. Then you do it the way you interpret it, and then you interpret it wrong, and your tournament is just voided. I mean, that is to me.
This just happened recently. Do you want to give the example? There was a tournament that NIP played in, and then you were playing it, and then mid-tournament you just found out, oh, it has no points anymore, which means, by the way, you obviously wouldn't have entered it if you'd have known that, right?
Yeah, exactly. We've actually been on both sides of this. So the first thing that happened was we declined an invitation where the TO literally wrote to us, is like, this is an unlicensed tournament. You will not get any points. And it's like, okay, we then declined the invitation. Afterwards, after they've already played, I think, 2 matches in the tournament itself, it's like, oh no, this turns out it's ranked, so you would have gotten points. Then we play the CCT now, the CCT 16, we win 2 matches, and it turns out there was something the tournament organizer did wrong, not us, like the TO, and then the entire tournament gets voided. And you reach a point where it's okay, we even if a tournament tells us this is a licensed tournament, how do we as a team verify this? And I mean, we're a big team, but imagine you are truly a small team trying to navigate this. I have no idea how I would do it. It just feels random at this point.
Yes.
I'm just super confused about, so the ones where I understand to a degree pulling the permissions for it to be ranked, right? If you don't follow the rules, and we'll get into the CCT thing because it makes sense to me, even though I don't think it's fair. But how do they determine, like, in the middle of an event that it's now ranked? Because isn't there this whole rule that they have to give like 6 months notice, which is something that I also think is super stressful to smaller TOs, because trying to find funding for events a year before so you can set a date is just impossible if you've ever worked on the back end of trying to sell these things. So like, it doesn't make sense to me that you can then announce that it's ranked in the middle of it, because they were supposed to do that months prior, weren't they, Threads?
Yeah, the announcement requirements are also very confusing to me, because I look at a lot of tournaments and I feel
most of them haven't. I mean, the joke is some of the majors haven't done some of those rules, if people don't know. Some of the actual majors are late on those rules. By the way, I'll give a very quick example of how I think it works, TechGo, which goes like this. I will never trash talk the Netherlands because it's my adoptive country. It lets me live here. But one thing that's strange about them is the Dutch are super chill. So when it comes to government stuff, they're super laissez-faire. Like, they will put on the document, like, for example, when you come to the Netherlands and you want to become like someone who lives here as a resident, they will say something on the document. You have to register with like the town council within like 30 days of arrival. But if you even on day 1 that you arrive, try to book an appointment, they're going to be like, yeah, just come in and like, your appointment's in like 2.5 months. And you'll just think like, but I'm going to miss the thing. Oh my goodness. But then their country, they don't mind about that. They're just like, oh no, look, that's just the way the system works. Yeah, ideally it'd be 30, but there's a backlog, so it goes beyond that. The problem is that's basically what Valve's issue is, because as Threat says, they seem to either like get really motivated 1 week of the year and go, right, fix everything, and then just leave everything like that. And I've always felt like some of this comes from the days when they were balancing the game. They don't want pros every day whining about the thing. Oh, tweak this, tweak that, so they just sort of like let it play out. Let's see how it is in a few months. And so I've basically heard when people try to even get some of these things done, I've heard not all of that is even on those TOs. I have heard there are some big TOs that have just not done the things they were told, like announce the location of the major, for example, which is kind of like, because you were supposed to do that years out. If people wonder why they saw that news recently, you probably did a double take, right? When it said PGL announces that tournament in January, you think it's already January, but it was for like 2027 or something. You went, what? But that is actually how it's supposed to work for the big events, guys. They're supposed to announce really far out. But as Threat says, the problem comes, how do you contact Valve to get all this stuff done? And it doesn't actually seem like they instantly reply and it can instantly be done. So I would imagine in that case, there's just been some sort of weird delay and they've just decided partway into the event, like, take the points off. Whereas like at a minimum, we should know, by the way, forget even before, you should probably know weeks in advance for these events, because as he says, he has to accept the invite or pick another event. Another thing is teams aren't picking. It's not just say a yes to every invite and figure it out later. The events all overlap, especially the online ones. There's matches every day, so you have to know in advance. And so at the moment, it's really scuffed. I feel like some of this is Valve, some of this is Rogue TOs, but the Rogue TOs are more at the top end as far as I know. I think the Tier 2 people want to know what the VRS thing is.
Yeah, and if you are a Tier 2 tournament organizer, right, Valve should also understand that they don't have, crazy amount of resources to navigate this.
Yes.
That is, I will get into the open qualifier topic as well here now, because open qualifiers is probably the best thing. We would just ask for way more open qualifiers. And it's also completely fair. It doesn't matter if you're NIP, it doesn't matter. It's open to everyone. But there's currently like no real good incentive to have it, because the logistics of running a open qualifier. Imagine you have 1,024 teams, and imagine how many of those matches you get a conflict. They accuse someone of cheating. Who's going to deal with that? And you have to run it in a day. It's not easy. And if you're a Tier 2 organizer, it's like, no way we're doing that. We don't have the resources.
Here's the sad thing. Even though when it benefits teams, they love open qualifiers, the other problem is everyone knows from the RMR, because the RMR used to basically start with a qualifier that was an open qualifier, like Threat says. It wouldn't even just be like 128. It would be like 1,000 teams or 500 teams. And I can tell you, the worst thing is, because you had to get it done in these days, what would always happen is a semi-known team them would run into literal cheaters who, by the way, if you just see their POV, they're actually cheating at the wall hacking. I've even seen people aimbotting these. I'm not even joking. They beat you, and then the problem is, if it was a different tournament with no time pressure, you'd go, right, replay that match or disqualify them, and you get to go. You don't even get to go forwards, even if we know they're cheating, though, because we have to do the next match. We have to go. The next match might have been in 2 hours after that, or the next morning. So it's hard to put it. What I'm trying to make the case is here: if the people who run the majors that are $1 million tournaments have a hard time making this work, it'd be really hard for every other event in the world to have these open qualifiers that let everyone potentially qualify, even though it sounds like a great idea. Again, it's brilliant in practice. In theory, I mean.
Yeah, it is very hard to do. And it's actually the only way of making it completely open. Yes, to do that. And it's, once again,
even if it's just one spot, just give one spot, and at least in theory, everyone could get in. If you win all the matches, you would just be in the tournament. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, even for a top team getting through a 1,024 team bracket, that is not easy.
Hard,
like we have, even if we have 90% chance of winning every match, if it's 10 matches, we're probably not going to qualify, even though we're playing not very good teams. It's just the way it is. But it once again comes back to, I'm going to keep going on about this, is Valve being a bit disconnected. And I think you said it right, Thorin, where they seem to be, part of the year they're very into it, and then they disappear. And you've heard these rumors about how they work at Valve, where you're basically free roaming, and it's like, today I'm going to work on Dota, maybe I will build Steam Deck 3 today.
It sounds like a cat cafe, mate. It sounds mental. I don't know what's going on there. It sounds wild, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, their entire hiring process.
Who knows what's going on? I know.
Yeah, I mean, I have this anecdote where I spoke to, you probably remember Volcano.
Yeah, of course, the old 1.6 player, yeah. He actually works on Valorant now, funny enough.
Exactly. I'm going to get to that.
Oh, right.
Because he applied, I talked to him, this is like 2016 or something, at his classic Twitch after parties at some tournament, right? And he told me how he had applied for a job at Valve. He obviously has, I think, a computer engineering background. He has literally been in the #1 team in the world in Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
He has actually made the map cache.
Yep.
I think he also had some, background in making games, and he applies for a job at Valve, and it's like, there's no way. And it's like, what are the requirements?
Yes.
And then, and to that point, he's now one of the top 3 people in all of Valorant at this point. But Valve just declined him instantly. I don't know if they just hire people they know, or they just have some, you have to work in the industry for 20 years. I don't know, but it's almost like a cult to me.
I mean, essentially, another way of saying that is they just don't have any famous people from CS in there. It's more like the people who are at Valve who work on CS do this. Like the joke in the modern day thread is, because I don't keep up on this, and actually in the past, pros used to complain a lot that they didn't reply to the emails and stuff. I only know, even from Valve, those original people that came to all those majors back in the 2010s, mate. I know those guys, like the Matt Wood guy online, and then I can't remember all their names, but one of them has like an Eastern European name. Everyone knows like 2 or 3 people you see if you go to the major, at least you did back in the day. Aside from that, especially because of the structure, nobody even knows who you actually email, by the way. People just, for real, you get messages, people like me, like, do you have a contact I can get to Valve? No, what would I do? Even if I had one, by the way, I don't know if he's the guy who does this. Like, no, it's not clear at all, actually. What were you going to say, Tech Go?
I think this was Messi also said this, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I think he said it quite a few times on different shows, where he said that the other problem is that there's no one really at Valve who I don't want to say understands, but has insights into competitive Counter-Strike, understands the esports situation. And he said they need whether it be like a Sponge or a Messioso, like someone who can kind of communicate with them and stress test, for example, like this whole open circuit. Some of these problems were mentioned last year. Not everyone was super pro. Messioso was the loudest.
Yeah, he did a great job. Even though sadly it's the least viewed episode, Sam, because it's all about technical stuff. If you go back, Messioso looks like fucking Paul Atreides. He predicts all this stuff we're talking about. It's actually one of the sad things. He knew this was all coming, basically. Yeah.
And no one wanted to hear it, because it just, I think it's very convoluted. Like, we're here now, we've gone on for 30 minutes, and there's probably someone watching going, I don't understand why all of this matters. But it is, you have to know all of this foundation to get to the important bits. And that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in now, because there was all of this tier 2 drama. Obviously threads. So here's my thing. I'm looking from the outside in, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I was aware last year that there is a lot of concern around match fixing, cheating in tier 2, tier 3, right? A lot of these online cups, it's been, there's
even some famous ones that you at home do know. I have heard teams match fix even in like real games. Yes, it's not just like nobody's. Absolutely.
And basically what happened last year when tournament organizers, I suppose, had the right of refusal to not allow teams to enter, they were, and again, this is all very much rumor based. I think HLTV has some sources, but don't say that I'm saying that this is factual. My understanding is some of these TOs worked with companies to kind of find out who the problematic players could be and simply just shadow ban them. They never said to them, hey, listen, we think you might be a cheater or you might be linked to cheaters. They simply just didn't allow them access to the tournaments. And then it appears they did it again this year, even though Valve has now set up the correct ranking. Threat, have I got that story right?
I'll just throw this out here. I can say this. No one else in this chat agrees with this. No one's agreed beforehand that I'm going to say this. I'll just say this. I have heard from people who were credible that in CCT there was actual match fixing going on. Like, if people don't know, CCT was considered the tier 2, like, online cop thing that you play in. In fact, famously, even real tier 1 teams, if they didn't go to events, would just play CCT instead. Or if you didn't have, like, the spot of the major, you played CCT in the meantime. So first of all, I've heard there's matches there. So obviously, that tournament themselves, like you're saying, Sam, if they get the word that there's teams doing this, and especially some of them, I'm sorry, you're just blatant, like some of them aren't even good at hiding it. Eventually, what you do to be smart is you just, like you say, you sort of ghost those teams. You just don't get to be part of the tournament. And I'll even add in, actually, won't be popular, but one of the best sets of people who can tell you who match fixes is obviously the betting companies, isn't it? Because they remove the games from their fucking site because they don't want the game to keep doing that thing where it's a normal match with, 1.5 to 2 odds. And then 1 second before the match where it's insane odds, 10 to 1 odds, suddenly all the money goes in on the 10 odds. And then magically that team wins. And you're like, what? Because obviously, spoiler, they don't want to give away all their profits, do they? So sadly, the betting companies, who, by the way, if you just say to a fan, do you want the betting companies to have a say in who attends events, they're going to go, no. Believe it or not, they actually financially have sort of solved some of those issues, though. They have famously limited certain teams and players from ever being on their website. And then if they work with certain TOs, have informed the TO, like, this is the 10 teams, or I'll take that team off, etc. But the issue there is that's community done or from a company, a third party. It's nothing to do with Valve, and nobody went to Valve or showed Valve or got a Valve. They weren't banned by Valve. VAC never caught anyone. So the problem is Valve essentially acts like all of that is just you meddling. Like that's not since this is the official Valve ranking system, remember, they're not going to allow you to do that, unfortunately. So as far as I can tell, people say that is literally what's cost CCT, is that CCT had shadow banned too many teams, and now Valve wants it to be like, I guess, sort of like, well, how can you know that much, or some theoretical discussion like that,
Yeah, I also want to add to this, because there are still people, I mean, obviously there are people in the comment section that every time their team loses, like, oh, they threw.
Right.
Yeah, but a lot of people are also on the side of, like, people are not cheating in the top, people are not throwing matches.
Yes.
The way I view it is, in every other sports ever, people have cheated if you can cheat, and people have threw matches if you can't throw matches to get money. Why on earth would CS be any different? That would be like the most naive way of thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, point fingers at anyone who has done it, but that it's happening, I would say it's guaranteed, right?
Yes.
And both cheating and people throwing matches.
Yes.
So that's the thing. There's a part of me that goes, I don't disagree with if this is the truth and they were shadow banning based on what some of the betting companies were telling them. I don't disagree. I'm like, I understand the ethical questions here now, because obviously it's who's researching. And that was where then
and obviously there could be bias. Like, you don't want someone, like, the obvious nightmare scenario is this, Sam. What if some guy at the betting company hates you and he's friends with the guy from the other team? I get why. Here's the problem. Again, notice how this whole discussion is, in theory, I don't think Valve are idiots. I think what they're doing makes sense. I agree with them. I would want, like, there to be an ultimate, like, person who has a very high standard who decides what the events. The problem is, every time you put it into practice, you can tell they didn't think through some of these things, or even worse, they didn't know it was possible. Like, for real, no joke. If I could go back in a time machine, I would tell Valve this last year. Get Messi also and a couple of other people. Sit down, take your current system, input the results from the last 6 months of all the tournaments we had, and see when it would change, who would have been invited, who wouldn't, who would have missed things, would like actually this have affected it? But the problem is we haven't done that. We've just started the year. We're just doing it. We're doing it live. We're like Bill O'Reilly. You didn't expect that line, did you?
No, I did not. Surely in this situation, And I've seen this name. I mean, there's obviously a really fantastic article that HLTV did. I will put it in the description. I think that they try to explain this as best they can. But they bring up my favorite topic from last year, the ESIC situation, which is my understanding is Valve is basically am I correct in saying that? But there is, if ESIC decides that you're cheating, then the tournament organizer can kick you out. But now we all know that ESIC can't do anything for 6 months, so none of that would matter because the rankings would be done again. I mean, is that where we're now sitting, Threat? We're reliant on this organization that seems to be sort of their hands tied behind their back, bricks on their legs, and we've thrown them in the lake.
Yeah, and that's sort of the CCT situation, right? Where I don't know the exact details, but that is, I mean, people have heard enough rumors. That's probably what happened. And it puts them in a weird position where I can't, even though we were the victims of this, I can still understand why they have to void it if they say this is the entire way this, like, the invitation has to be run. I think the biggest issue for me is there needs to be better control before they get the license.
Yes.
That is the problem, right? Because now it already happened. Someone's going to be the loser. Because I understand, like, I don't know, Navi Junior or whatever team it was that didn't get invited. I would be absolutely furious. Like, if I didn't get an invitation and other teams are getting points, that doesn't make any sense. But at the end of the day, there's like how a team gets a license. And when I'm talking to TOs, that seems to be not clear at all. I've literally had TOs writing to me and saying, I don't know if I got a license. Do you know if we got a license if we got this email? And I'm like, shouldn't there be like a process for this? It's like pretty important. And we tried to make the schedule for the whole year. And they're like, yeah, Bjorn, does this tournament have a ranking? It's like, I have no clue. The TOs doesn't know.
How does that impact you now? So you've got a team that, unfortunately, you did not have the Falcons money to just go buy a core and bang it in so that you could get those ranking points. So you have to fight through qualifiers. This is what you're going to have to do. You have to grind all the online caps to try and get points, to try and get yourself into a position where you can get invited to the big lands and kind of work your way up. It is the hardest path to success that NIP is going to have to face. I'm a huge Snappy fan, so I believe it seems only fitting that he chooses
in the chat. It's all good.
Yeah, the toughest way to grind through.
Yeah.
But how the hell do you do it? Because, like you said, now you've played an event and it means nothing. Like this is going to be so difficult for NIP. But hell, what about like these really small teams that have absolutely no funding, whose entire well-being is going to be dependent on how it goes in these online cups?
I mean, we are lucky that we're getting, wildcard invites. I mean, that's another topic. Let's not talk about it yet, at least. So we can still get into the CCTs. But let's say we didn't have a wildcard invite. If you really want to, make a lineup from scratch, it's open qualifiers. Like there are no other options at this point. Also, it's very confusing what open qualifier means in the rankings, because you would think that it's from sports and open qualifier is literally a qualifier where everyone can just sign up. It's not that clear to me that is what it means in the rule set. But regardless, there just needs to be more open qualifiers. And the first one this year is in February. So you would literally have 0 ranked events in all of January. Then you're thrown into, a 1,000-team bracket immediately, where you could, as Thorin said, you could play a bunch of cheaters, and you would probably never get any redemption for losing.
You could also just, by the way, have a bad bracket draw, and your two teams that on LAN would be good, but you just play each other in, the round of 32, and so one of you has to get knocked out, and you can't go, but for all we know, the other side of the bracket is all the unknown teams. By the way, this actually particularly affects NIP. It's one of the reasons I wanted to invite Threat, because since they've made this new squad, and by the way, I said it earlier, I will say it again, I actually think that is the way you GM a team. You try to pick the players that can be really good, and in this particular case, I actually think the gamble was right. You could have just gone with the cynical online cop merchant people who get you straight to the tournaments, but the point is, even if you got to the LAN, they wouldn't then be that good, would they? We want the team to be we want Snappy calling on LAN with these players fragging out like Jota, killing everyone, etc. The fucking Aristos or whatever. We want all these guys in the game, right? But the issue for me is people also don't realize, because they're starting at such a bad position in terms of points, it's not like when there was an open qualifier. If they actually were great and they just did a great job in the first couple, they could be at kind of eat sale, they could be like no, it's going to take them before they can get to the lands, potentially a few months. And that means that it's only the online cops they're playing at this point in time, right? So suddenly everything's about the online tournaments. It's not like the old days where you can get straight to a LAN and we can see a lineup fresh in that sense.
Yes, that's exactly what it was going to be for us for a couple of months now. And it's That's what I told Exist. Like, he has the final word when it comes to the roster, but obviously as a GM, I could say like, oh no, we need to have our old core or whatever. Like, we didn't have, that high of a ranking. We still had high enough to get invites to CCT. But seeing as we came from probably the biggest silly season of all time, potentially, we could either choose to, play it safe, keep the old lineup that hasn't performed, just to be in rank 60 to get invites to CCT, or we could say, okay, let's gamble a bit, take all of the best players we can at this point, put them together. I think Exist did a really good job. I think this team is actually very
looks like a LAN team already. Yeah, already looks like a LAN team.
Yeah, and I also told them, like, I am fully aware we're going to play a lot of online qualifiers. We're going to play so many matches that we will lose to teams, like Cyber Choke. You will do that eventually, and then the community will be like, haha, NIP never changing lineup all the time. That is actually all part of the plan. We're expecting the hate. We're expecting to lose against some of these
the process,
teams.
Guys.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that the thing that will matter the most in the end is getting the best possible team in the end, right? I mean, depending on if they will add more or less open qualifiers. Because even though I've been very negative about Valve, I still think the idea of this ranking was to make it more open. And if they noticed it's more closed, they will change. That I am certain of.
Right.
That's my biggest concern, because I do think on paper what they were trying to do was give more opportunity to teams like the Mongols or teams that came from smaller regions who didn't have the finances to kind of rise up. I just think while it looked pretty on paper, when you actually put it into practice, it fell apart. And my biggest concern, and Thread, I mean, I'll pose this to you because now it's the business argument of, with it being sort of an open system, TOs are now fighting to get the biggest names to be at their events. You can turn down invites. We haven't seen it happen much. I think Pro League phases turned down. For the most part, all the big teams are saying yes, but there is going to come a point where people are going to start being a little bit more strategic about how they play this. I think Messi also has explained that you can actually play the system a bit where choosing not to do certain tournaments will benefit you for the major, things like that, as in terms of how this ranking works. So what's immediately going to happen is TOs are so dependent on getting big names because that's how they make money, which means budgets are going to be tight. They've got to try and make cash and bank on if maybe this team doesn't arrive.
My headset just died. 1 second.
Oh, okay.
No problem. I was going to talk about cash, but I mean, Duncan, I'll push it to you. Like, here's my issue. TOs' budgets are going to be super tight. They're going to be very selective of what they do. Open qualifiers financially are not going to make sense in those situations. And that's what worries me, because the resources to run them become difficult. And in this system, they don't have to do the open qualifiers. So a team like NIP, and Thread is back. And this is what I'll quickly, the TLDR Thread, as I'm saying, it's financially not really viable for TOs to do open qualifiers. It costs them a lot of resources that they could push into making a better product, which means less open qualifiers, less teams like me getting a chance.
At the top end, they're all competing against each other. So if I start doing that and you don't, then you get an advantage on me. You just invite all the top teams. I'm doing this big giant thing where everyone hates on me when 3 teams that are supposed to get through don't. And it's a nightmare. Yeah, so essentially Valve has to fix this. Like, we can't fix it on our end, I don't think.
I mean, I think the very key thing to make it more open is to give more incentives for the tier 2 tournaments to also have open qualifiers. That is the key thing. For our perspective, we are not expecting to get invited to Blast or Pro League. We shouldn't, because we have a new lineup. We are trying to play the tier 2 tournaments, and that's where the problem comes in, right? If we can't even in any way, shape, or form get into those tournaments, there is no way in. And the weird thing is, it's only the tier 1 tournaments right now that has open qualifiers, where it actually should be the other way around. Because, I mean, if we get a good result in 1 or 2 tier 2 tournaments, I mean, there is even this rule, like if we win a tier 2 tournaments, we can get invited to tier 1 events 6 months after that with that core. Doesn't matter, right? So that's all we need to do. So we're actually fully focused on tier 2 right now as a pathway to tier 1, of course.
I'll give you an example from sports that people might understand very quickly if they know this sport. In the sport tennis actually is quite similar to how like a Counter-Strike circuit works. All the different events, if you don't know, aren't the same people. Wimbledon don't run the US Open and don't run the Australia. These are different events, and that's like their equivalent of Katowice and the major, etc. But they actually have a very clever stratified system in tennis, which goes all the way to the bottom. So in theory, for real, if Sam was actually a good like amateur tennis player, she could go to like a regional like qualifier. By the way, this actually once even happened to Andre Agassi in the 90s. He went from being the number one player in the world. He had a bunch of drug problems and his game fell off and he had injuries and he became so low in the rankings. He had to go to what are called challenger events that are just essentially for like I say, like semi-pros, like the sort of like person who'd like teach some rich guy's wife how to play tennis or something. He was playing against those people. He had to re-qualify to the circuit. And what they do is you can't, it doesn't matter even if you were old Andre Agassi or the person who's like a sick player now, you don't get straight into Wimbledon. Like the top 128 teams get into that. What they do is they have levels below the slams is the 1,000 tournaments, then below them's the 500, then there's 250s. And the point is, you can see how if you're good, you go to whatever appropriate level you can get into, you get the points and placings there. That gets you into the next ones. And then eventually, the idea is when you crack the top 120, you'll get the invite to Wimbledon or the Australian Open. I agree with Fred. By the way, that system in itself, if you fix the bottom part, it's a funnel. It just funnels everyone the correct way to the top. The problem is, notice, as usual, because like me, we only care about the top 10 teams in the big tournaments. We're acting like at the end of the funnel, you can fix all the problems. You have to fix it at the bottom. As he says, if he could just, if his team had open qualifiers to every other team did, to every tier 2 tournament, and the point thing made sense, eventually the way the tier 2 gets you into the tier 1 would work for everyone. So actually, I agree. If you fix the bottom end of it, actually, you'll solve most of these problems, mate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think at this point, right, where it's just more open qualifiers, we are fully aware we're not better than everyone else. All the players know they have to grind a lot. We have to play officials every day if that is what it takes. We're not like pretending like, oh, we only play the good teams. We have to do it the hard way. And like, with the lineup we have now, I'm sure we would do it.
By the way, I'll just say as well, Sam, there is a reason, again, theoretically, why this is a good idea from Valve, the idea that you can't just invite whoever you want, because, like, I won't say which tournaments, one of them was actually that one that Threats team got loads of points from. They just invite people. So in theory, they can just invite whoever they like, by the way. So that actually means, say there was some team of legendary players, how about old Virtus Pro where they got really bad and could never win an online game? They would obviously instantly be invited because Virtus Pro, you'd want all that viewership, you'd want like snacks playing in your tournament. But what about if at the time there was an up-and-coming team that became really good, and then like maybe it was Renegades, and they just can't get invited because they're just not like a famous team. Well, in this scenario, you make it so it's like, well, you don't choose that. You just invite these teams in the ranking and then you play your tournament. Again, that sounds like a very meritocratic system if you do it correctly.
I just worry that the financial implication is, okay, cool. So more tier 2 open qualifiers. So let's look at, I mean, this is going to be, here's my Chicken Little moment. I don't think tournaments make as much money as people think. You got free viewership. You're not making cash, right? That's at the top level. We're talking Cato. We're talking Blast. You're going to see that this year. Like budgets are being cut. Like that tournaments need to try and find a way to make money. And everyone's put it all in the prize money, as we're saying, because they're competing against each other. Like ESL has to compete with Blast and PGL, so everyone's putting all the money in the prize purse. Yeah. And that's at the top. At the bottom, I say bottom, tier 2, you've got much smaller companies who don't have massive investments from governments or from countries or from whatever else. They don't have the big sponsors. They don't have the LAN events. They are fighting online for viewership, which is sometimes maybe 100 people. I've seen it where some games. So they've got to try and make cash. And now we're saying, okay, but you should be doing open qualifiers, which is going to cost you a fortune. The system is broken, and we keep saying Valve needs to fix it. I think that they will, but I don't think it's going to happen in the space of this year. I think it's going to be one of those things where the changes we only start seeing next year. So is there an interim solution, Threats? Is there something that can be done now to try and help?
It's, I mean, yes, more regional to like narrow the teams down more. I mean, it is hard, and I understand where they come from, right? I mean, another solution is just the amount of tier 2 tournaments. Because to be fair with the ranking right now, I think the lowest ranked team invited to CCT, which counts as a tier 2 tournament. So if you win it, you can get directly invited to tier 1. But the lowest ranked team was like rank 100 something. So at this point, from our perspective, that's why it is a risk if we don't get any points at all. But if we come into the rank, top 90, 80, we're still probably looking at getting some invites. And that's it, right? You just need some points on the board. I mean, maybe there could be a case that you need to have tier 3 tournaments, whereas, maybe there's less requirements on the prize money.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
it's like I said about the tennis model. Eventually, you should, if it works, you should just expand it out. And the joke would be eventually we just get all the best teams in the world. We'd solve this problem.
Yeah, because right now it is top 100 is still like top 100 in the hardest game to compete in the world. You still need to have I guarantee you, look, everyone on that top 100 list have at least 10,000 hours.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy at all. And I mean, we also have like a lot of resources to put in.
Yes.
So I think they just need to, push it down even further. And I mean, that's also when the prize money thing becomes a problem. Because I don't necessarily, like when I started competing, like I could compete in a small Swedish tournament when I was younger where you won 5 mouse pads. But I got to play, Spawn, Heaton and those guys in that tournament. And that was what my ticket in. Because all of a sudden we like beat Heaton and Spawn. Yeah. And they're like, who the hell are these guys? They're playing so well. And that was my ticket. It doesn't need to be prize money. And the unfortunate thing when they use that, bounty offer, bounty collected, everything is based on prize money, that doesn't really make any sense the lower down you go in the ranking. Because then the event weight, as I talked about before, will be 0, so you will not get any points at all.
Yes.
And that's also a problem. Like I can sort of see it at tier 1, but I mean, as always, like things require so much context and domain knowledge to make a good decision, right?
By the way, that's also a detail I think people has lost. Because again, I like the idea of the bounty aspect. That's a way to sort of show, like I said, the example I would give is just Saw last year. The dream way this could have been implemented would be Saw would have gone to Cologne. They would have beaten those big name teams. They'd have made top 4. And then your dream, by the way, is they go back and play in Portuguese lands and they play in regional tournaments. And that gives, by the way, the teams at that level a chance to do the same thing, to beat Saw, to get some points and show their. But unfortunately, in this new system, if you're Saw and you have like a top 10 rank, you're not going to do that. In fact, it might even be against your interest to even attend that LAN. And then also, it's not even just the smaller ones, Sam. Like, look, there's 2 ones that were on Reddit in the last 2 days that people might not have understood the angle on. So that Indian tournament, Sky Esports, basically is going to cancel the tournament, right? What people don't know is they're like, yeah, but it sucked last year. That's not why. It's because what will have happened is they'll have found out they're not going to get enough of the invited big name teams, so it's not worth running the event. So they're not going to put that prize money up and run the event anymore. It was announced today, by the way, that Star Ladder, they used to have a major in 2019, guys. Like Star Ladder is cancelling an event because, again, it's actually a mix of both on this one. One, I imagine they're not getting the teams, but 2, it's implied it might be because they've let some of the really big TOs who sort of, they're almost like they're like too big to fail logic of how things work in finance and stuff where the rules don't apply to the big dogs. They didn't all follow the rules themselves on announcing events and stuff. So if they're putting a different event and all the teams go, actually, we're going there, then it isn't worth running your event. See, notice the key point here is it's not like you don't get your favorite teams and the big names. So you go, it's okay, I'll run the event anyway. That no longer makes any business sense because you've got like hundreds of thousands of prize money. You've rented a venue somewhere. That can even, by the way, cost like a deposit of money. You're going to have to fly teams in. That doesn't work if suddenly you're getting teams a third as good as the ones you thought you were getting. The old model, as you said, even at the top of the model, it's not great. It's just we can make it work. And by the way, the sad thing is, the reason why everyone in the universe hasn't complained yet, like the reason why you haven't seen everyone in all the top 20 teams complain, is their cynical way to get around this. You just saw it in the roster off season. They just said, well, I won't even put myself in that position. Just buy a court of 3 players that already have enough points. Hence why certain teams that you looked at, I'll just throw it out there, people like the Heroics of the world, Heroic would have built a team like Nip did now. They would have picked the best players possible. They didn't. They clearly took a core because they were like, we just want to be in the tournaments again. Let's just straight back in the tournaments and we'll skip all of that. Well, it isn't a solution to just say, I'm not going to be part of that. So I think at the moment, it's actually, people don't know. It's going to be when these bigger orgs all get affected. They're all going to eventually complain. The problem is they're not doing it yet because they're in the tournaments. Why do they care, right?
Yeah, and the key thing with that as well is that a lot of those teams, now Heroic actually has a decent lineup, I think, but other teams are, okay, we're just going to get a core as long as we're playing tournaments. Because the ranking is so aggressive, they also forget, like, if you don't win, you will fall down super fast compared to the old rankings, right? As I said, in May, the Shanghai major is worth 0 points. And even in April is probably like 10% left of those points.
So basically, if Spirit had come last place at every tournament, they now would have fuck all points, even though they're the reigning major champions.
Yeah, exactly. But it's it's such a weird thing. And I mean, maybe we are in the wrong year. Maybe it's, it's never going to get fixed and we completely screwed up. I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing we can do is guess. If something, we actually also got an invite to, Sky Esports, which is also funny, and that got cancelled. So we had three events planned, all of them just gone. we're just like, oh, it's like, this is going great, guys. I'm like trying to explain it to, the higher ups in NIP. It's
like,
yeah,
no, it's going to work out. We're going to get the spots. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's like 3 out of 3 tournaments didn't work out. It's a great start. But I mean, I still think eventually the best teams will. I mean, maybe it will take longer than I expected. That's the only difference.
I think that's the funny bit, and no disrespect, chat threat, but obviously when they announced the end of the partner leagues, I remember a lot of the online chatter was like, well, this is good because now we don't have to watch NIP get shat on at an event and blah, blah, blah. But for me as a fan of Counter-Strike, I hate what's happening now because I think that we should, the opportunities that we saw last year, the SAW going all the way through to the playoffs of Cologne, shit, that's like the best part about Counter-Strike. It's not going to happen anymore. Like an NIP builds a roster from scratch that looks terrifying. We don't know if we're going to see it. And you probably can't talk about this, but let's be frank. You've got some players in that lineup who in 8-9 months time could be sitting there going, hey, like I can't keep doing this for another year. Like I need to be on a stage somewhere. So you're going to end up with these really mediocre lineups because the core can still get teams somewhere. And that worries me because then I think everything you were complaining about when it was a partner league is going to happen again tenfold. So for a fan, that's not fun. And then obviously you also have the business side of, I think where you mentioned Starladder, I also think that had to do with the major change happening with how the major was going to be run.
Something like that, yeah.
That also lay into, so now you're going to have the situation.
Which again was supposed to all be known like years before. I mean, look, I don't know if it ever could have even met when they announced it last year, but yeah, it should have been known ages ago, that stuff, yeah. Like I actually feel bad for Starladder. I'm sure they scheduled properly in the calendar and thought they had this spot for an event, and suddenly they themselves find there's no event, yeah.
Do you know how much money they probably... This is something, again, like, do you know how much money an organizer loses? Because to book a venue, you have to book those venues 6 months to a year in advance.
Yeah.
You pay a deposit for that. So, like, I don't think a lot of fans realize the cost implication of that is they will lose that money. Now they've lost that money, which means their next event is going to have to pick up the slack of that. And the budget's going to go down. So you're going to watch the event, you're going to bitch about the quality of it, but they're stuck in the situation where they've been affected by something out of their control. Sky Esports is going to start canceling their events. That's a tier 2 LAN that ends up falling away because they've lost money. So like the repercussions of all of this for teams, for players, for TOs, it all impacts them. But most importantly, as fans, I think we're going to be pretty disappointed if it keeps going this way. The scene is not going to benefit from this, Threads.
Yeah, and I think they, as I said, I still have high hopes they will change it. And I mean, to be very blunt, I mean, we took this risk. We guessed if things is gonna like work out, and they will change the rules regardless. In the end, if they never change the rules, and this is the way it's going to be forever, to be very blunt, like maybe this is not a very good business to be in.
Yeah,
right? Because
that's
honestly,
my worry.
right? Yeah, and that's the way it is done. But also from our perspective, again, like why we took this massive risk, and it's very easy to look at this and be right about all the points. Like, this is why you should have gotten a core. This is why you should have kept your core because of all of this. This is why it's a bad decision. It's like people just see it like this is a bad choice because of all of these reasons, but you also need to think about the alternatives, right? All the time. Like the alternative would have been for us to keep the old core. And I mean, people saw the results in 2024. It wasn't pretty right. That would be a massive risk as well, to keep a core that potentially is not working. And the other option, buying a core, but then it's like, that is so unlikely. It has to be available. It's so many things that has to be aligned. And also, Existis to find the core that has to believe in the players. I mean, at this point, we just felt like this was the least amount of risk, even though it is a massive risk.
By the way, there's 2 other angles that are also quite sinister omens for the circuit. One is, remember what I said earlier, this premise was almost like, I almost think the ideology or the philosophy behind this was, again, I don't want other people to decide who plays in tournaments and who doesn't and what the cutoff is. I want it to be there's this open global circuit, and let's just let merit play. Whoever's the best, you get into the tournament. The problem is, part of that is included with the idea, this is why people wanted the partner system to go away. They don't want it to be that there's the haves and the have-nots. There's the teams that have the spots and always get in, and the big names, and then there's the ones that can't. It doesn't matter how good you are. Famous example was Ents. Before Ents had their Blast spot or whatever it was, they used to be like a top 3 team in the world, and they wouldn't be at Blast because they couldn't go through that one qualifier and get the spot because of how crazy online players, right? You will actually also now have this happen with players. Think about the scenario Threat's talking about. What if you make a team with known players who are used to being at all the lands, and then you do badly for 3 months and you don't get any lands, and by the way, you're not getting to spots, you're not getting any prize money. You're now, by the way, that player is going to be incredibly incentivized to go to any team that is at the tournaments. And even worse, you might be incentivized to sell for less just to get some revenue off of it. So you're not losing on your squad entirely. Like, it's actually going to put the smaller teams in a way tougher spot as well. I think people don't realize how crazy that could get.
I'm so depressed now. I'm sitting here being like, there's no hope. What are we going to do? I don't want to go to Valorant.
Okay, glass half full, guys. Okay. So the positive is still, that if you look at before, like the ends couldn't get to Blast, there are still a lot of perks with this. They are heading in the right direction. Yes. I wish they didn't implement
As he said,
this soon.
In this scenario, ends could have won a tier 2 tournament, or they could have gotten into like the end. Put it this way, in theory, there is still a bigger path for some teams to get through. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I in some ways, I could be I'm a bigot here because I was part of NIP. I was part of the professional circuit. We just played safe and we were like, could lose matches. And it's like, yeah, we're still getting invites to all of the tournaments. Whereas, Forest, I know I talk a lot with Forest and Freiburg. They went out to Dignitas. They saw, okay, this is a nightmare. It is so hard to qualify into anything. So being a completely fresh team has always been a problem. In some way, right? I don't think it's necessarily harder to be a completely fresh team, but this is the first time I notice it firsthand because, I mean, obviously I've been very, very busy being in, higher tiers before, so I didn't notice it. And this has potentially been a problem for a very long time. And that I'm also sad about that I didn't notice it because we should have done something about this sooner.
It's also implied, by the way, that actually this could scare off real orgs that you want in Counter-Strike. First of all, the other day I actually saw a story where, like, Carmine Corp, that French org, was talking about how, like, tricky CS is and how they're having to weigh up, should we even get in this game? If you don't know, by the way, look, I hate their fans, but that is an org you want in. They can literally, in League of Legends, by the way, put like 20,000 people in a stadium and have them all cheering like it's like Michael Jackson's coming out to perform or something. So in theory, you want people like that in your ecosystem. But if they look at the numbers and they're like, this is kind of expensive to get into and you can fail a few times and get no results, they're not going to want to come in. And even worse, you're also going to get scenarios where when you do get big name orgs come in, top TSM, they're going to be very cynical with who they pick up. They're going to say, I'll tell you what, I'm going to do this like a lottery ticket. I'm not going to do what Threats did and build a really good squad that if I get there, it's good on LAN. I'm going to make a squad where they're a little bit cheaper or it's players that like haven't been in top teams for a while. And what I'll do is, some teams do this for the RMR. I'll just go, you're my team for now, go for it, but I'll pay you very little. If you don't make it, what do I care? Go to the next thing or leave CS. But I'm not committed to the long term of this future being a prospect. And so, by the way, in a way, that'll get like a lot of young and inexperienced players in, but it'll also mean, by the way, people like the Snappies of the world, their career could just be over when they leave tier 1, by the way. They might just drift off because, remember, he can't play for $300 a month. He has a family. He's an actual adult human being who's invested 20 plus years in the game or whatever. So, yeah, the problem again is nobody designed this. Valve didn't sit down like an evil master, like, hey, I will fuck the tier 2 system. This is actually almost happenstance. And we never ran the circuit, so we didn't actually know what bugs would come up like this. So we're all discovering it fresh. We are still in January. I agree with Threat. In theory, what you have to live off, and this is sadly what a lot of political people have to live off, is you have to live off the fact that the idea is a good idea. Maybe if it works out, it's going to be the best for everyone. But at the moment, we really need the implementation fixed. Please hire someone to be a liaison from CS. Tell us all what's going on. Please read those emails, Valve. Contact people. Figure out the slots. Don't take slots away after the tournament's begun. You know what I mean? We can make you a checklist, Valve. You just run down the checklist, mate. We'll get it all done.
I'm in agreement with you, though, Thorin. I don't think that Valve is like this big evil corp. I think that if you're in Valorant and you deal with Riot, that's probably what you have to deal with. But I actually think that Valve, I think they care. I do think that they care. I just think that they're a bit removed. So in their mind, like I said, they looked at this and it was very much on paper going, bloody good idea. We're going to fix Counter-Strike. Now it's not working. I do think that they will come in and they will change it. I just think it will take a little bit of time. So we've just got to hope that everyone can weather the storm.
Yeah, and I think I know we will be fine. Like the roster we have now, I truly believe in exists. He's built an excellent roster. It just takes, this one tier 2 tournament win, which is tough because there are a lot of good teams out there, but I just know we will get there eventually. I'm certain.
On that note, unless Mouse releases all the private correspondence as to why their IGL is gone, we actually will be talking about the NIP roster in our next episode. So we'll see you then.